As the Western Allies and the Red Army swept across German-held territory towards the end of the Second World War, they began to uncover the horrors of Nazi Germany's crimes against humanity. Troops began to discover camps, surrounded by barbed-wired fencing and reeking of death. Inside these camps were piles of bodies in almost every corner. Living amongst this unimaginable horror were survivors, riddled with disease and on the brink of death themselves. 80 years ago, on the 27th of January 1945, Auschwitz-Birkenau was liberated by Soviet troops. Auschwitz was the centre of the Nazi genocide against Europe's Jewish population. In just over 4 years, over 1.1 million people would be murdered at the camp. As the Soviets began picking their way through the camp, they discovered that it wasn't just Jews that were murdered here. Poles, Gypsies, prisoners of war, and anyone the Nazis deemed untermenschen or subhuman were also killed at over 40 of the camps and subcamps that made up the Auschwitz complex. Auschwitz I was originally a Polish army barracks, and after the German invasion in 1939, the site was initially used to hold prisoners of war. In May 1940, the first prisoners from Sachsenhausen concentration camp, located in Germany, arrived. These first 30 prisoners were what known as professional criminals. A month later, over 700 Polish prisoners arrived at the camp. Around the same time, the first crematorium was built. Initially not designed with mass murder in mind, it was built to burn the bodies of prisoners who were executed or died inside of the camp. In October 1941, construction began to build Auschwitz II, or Auschwitz-Birkenau as it was also known. Birkenau was the largest of the 40 camps in the Auschwitz complex. Originally planned to house 100 to 125,000 prisoners when it was built, it became the site of untold horror, where hundreds of thousands of people were murdered in gas chambers by disease, starvation, overworking, or were simply shot. In September 1941, the first Soviet prisoners of war and Polish prisoners were gassed inside Auschwitz I using Zyklon B, which would go on to be the Nazis' main agent of death inside of the camp. In 1942, the SS who ran the camp moved gassing operations to Birkenau, as the facility at the original camp in Auschwitz I was unsuitable to housing large numbers of prisoners. 2 farmhouses were converted into gas chambers. Again, these facilities proved inadequate for the task of murdering the increasingly large number of Jewish people arriving at the camp on a daily basis. So, 4 large crematoria were constructed, each containing a changing room, a gas chamber, and a furnace room. Deportees arrived at Auschwitz-Birkenau via train. These trains were often cattle cars and housed hundreds, if not thousands, of prisoners packed inside. The conditions inside of them were appalling, with little to no food or water being provided and a bucket for a toilet. Many prisoners died before ever reaching the camp. Those who survived the perilous journey were greeted with dogs barking and SS men shouting instructions at them on the platform. A selection process was immediately undertook. Those deemed fit enough to work were sent in one direction, and the sick, elderly, mothers with children were sent to another. Those deemed healthy to work were processed, tattooed with their prisoner number, and sent off to other camps or stayed at Birkenau to work for the Reich. Those not selected for work were sent to their death. After being marched towards the gas chambers, they were told that they would be showered and deloused. They were told to undress and hang their clothes in the changing rooms before being walked into the gas chamber, which the SS disguised as a shower room. Some prisoners were even given soap and towels. Those who refused to enter were shot or torn apart by dogs. Once they were inside, the doors were shut. SS men then opened vents in the roof or the sides of the chamber, and Zyklon B pellets were dumped inside. For those inside the chamber, death took around 10 agonizing minutes. The bodies were then removed. Any gold teeth were taken out, as well as artificial limbs and glasses removed. The victims' heads were then shaved for other uses in Germany. The corpses were then taken to the crematorium and incinerated. Their ashes were either buried or thrown into the Vistula River. The scale of death at Auschwitz was astronomical. Between April and July of 1944, around 440,000 Hungarian Jews were deported to the camp. Approximately 320,000 were immediately sent to the gas chamber. Inside Auschwitz, it's believed that 1.1 million people were killed, but the number isn't fully confirmed due to the way the Germans disposed of the ashes and the bodies. In early November 1944, Heinrich Himmler ordered mass gassing to stop due to the rapid advance of the Red Army, and towards the end of November, orders were given to dismantle and destroy the gas chambers and crematoriums. For those prisoners inside the camp, an evacuation was ordered. Stolen goods were loaded on trains and driven west towards Germany. In January 1945, 56,000 prisoners were marched away from the camp towards railway lines and shipped into other concentration camps deeper in the Reich. It's estimated that around 9 to 15,000 never reached their destination. Around 9,000 prisoners, too sick or exhausted to march, were left behind in Auschwitz and the various subcamps. They faced an uneasy situation. SS and Wehrmacht units still roamed around the area, plundering what was left behind and shooting those who dared to move. On the 27th of January 1945, Soviet troops of the 60th Army, 1st Ukrainian Front, arrived at the camp and liberated it. After the war, around 1,000 people stood trial, suspected of committing war crimes at Auschwitz. 673 were charged. The camp's first commandant, Rudolf Höss, was found guilty and sentenced to death inside the camp. Today, Auschwitz is a museum and a memorial dedicated to those who were murdered at the site and throughout the Holocaust. It is also a World Heritage Site, and since 2005, the 27th of January has been commemorated as Holocaust Remembrance Day. If you've never been, I do recommend going, but it's not for the faint-hearted. Thank you all for watching today's video. See you all on the next one. Goodbye.